Something I didn't do while watching the eclipse that day was question its origins. At that time in my life, I firmly believed I had witnessed the work of an intelligent designer. Such an extraordinary astronomical demonstration didn't appear to be the result of mere cosmic chance. It was too beautiful, too inspiring, too perfect. The experience reinforced my belief in God and the religious worldviews I held at the time. About a year after the eclipse, I was asked to lead a discussion on the topic of belief at my church. I had led similar conversations before, so this wasn't an unusual request. However, during that time period, I was also evaluating information that suggested my faith didn't constitute everything I grew up believing it did. This caused me to dive deeper in my search for truth on the subject than I probably would have otherwise. Looking back, this assignment from my ecclesiastical leaders to discuss belief ironically caused me to contemplate a series of questions that led me away from the very things I believed in. I began preparing for the discussion by exploring the question of what exactly the term belief represented. I wondered whether belief was more like an on-off switch that you either had or didn't have, or if it was more like a dimmer control that could become stronger or weaker over time. As I researched this question, I discovered that belief is typically considered more of a binary on-off switch than an adjustable dimmer control. When we encounter new information, our brains must decide whether to accept it as accurate or to dismiss it as false. This decision is generally based on our prior experiences, logical reasoning, and any available evidence surrounding the information. All of these variables are used to varying degrees to determine whether we are convinced of something or not. If we're convinced, we're said to believe. If we aren't, we're generally said to disbelieve. This is why belief is typically considered binary. That conclusion isn't the end of the conversation on belief, though. We can add an additional layer of understanding by introducing a separate but highly intertwined term: certainty. Certainty is the degree of confidence we have in a particular belief. It can range from complete certainty to no certainty at all. Certainty, therefore, acts like the dimmer control described previously. The interaction between belief and certainty is similar to the interaction between an on-off switch and a dimmer control for a light. While belief doesn't represent varying degrees of strength, the certainty level associated with it does. A few examples can help demonstrate how belief and certainty work together. We'll start with the belief that the sun will come up tomorrow. This belief is usually associated with a high level of certainty due to previously observed sunrises, logical reasoning, and the scientific evidence that supports it. We could classify this and any other belief with high levels of certainty as rational belief. Sometimes we express these kinds of beliefs as though they were knowledge, despite some level of uncertainty still present. It wouldn't be surprising to hear someone say that they know the sun will come up tomorrow because the certainty level is so high. A high level of certainty isn't required for us to believe in something, though. For example, the belief that you'll win the lottery is associated with a very low level of certainty. Despite this low level of certainty, millions of people purchase lottery tickets every year. Not everyone who gambles affirmatively believes they'll win, but there are most definitely those who do. We could classify this and any other belief with low levels of certainty as irrational belief. Before writing this off as a substandard form of belief, keep in mind that for the individuals who do win the lottery, their belief aligns perfectly with reality and pays off in a big way. In addition to believing something based on our level of certainty, we can also disbelieve something with various corresponding levels of certainty. To revisit our previous examples, we can disbelieve that the sun will come up tomorrow despite a high level of certainty that it will. We can also disbelieve that we'll win the lottery due to the high level of uncertainty associated with it. These examples could be called irrational disbelief and rational disbelief, respectively. This leaves us with rational belief, rational disbelief, and irrational disbelief. The examples we use demonstrate extreme cases of each, but it's not always clear where the things we believe or disbelieve should be classified. We must also accept that people have varying previous experiences, different logical points of view, and inclinations to interpret evidence in an assortment of ways. This means the rationality of belief can be viewed subjectively just as much as it can be viewed objectively. Generally speaking, a believer in something is convinced for reasons that are rational to them, even if the reasons may seem irrational to someone else. After gaining a better understanding of the term belief, I turned my attention to the question of whether my personal belief in God was more objectively rational or irrational. To be rational, I felt like I needed to have a certainty level above 50%. If I determined it wasn't rational, I felt like I was being disingenuous to myself by continuing to claim I was a believer. To help gauge my personal level of certainty, I spent time investigating other people's reasons for believing or disbelieving in God. I was quickly overwhelmed with all the information available on both sides of the argument. People have been trying to tip the scales past 50% on this subject for far longer than I've existed, and both sides have compelling reasons to support their respective stances of belief and disbelief. I found countless books, blogs, videos, chat rooms, podcasts, and debates on the topic. I was amazed at the depth and thoughtfulness of the opinions presented. Sadly, this approach was unsuccessful in moving me past my desired 50% threshold. It seemed as though there was just too much information for someone like me to parse through it all and draw an accurate conclusion. Feeling somewhat defeated, I turned away from this approach and began considering the fundamental premises behind each position. In doing so, I found that the logical underpinnings that support belief in God or disbelief in God served as counterbalances to one another. The underlying premises that directly support belief in God indirectly suggest reasons to disbelieve. Similarly, the underlying premises that directly support disbelief in God indirectly suggest reasons to believe. Recognizing this relationship helped me understand why examining the reasons used by others to support belief or disbelief didn't lead to a definitive answer. The circular interaction of the logical premises involved creates a barrier around the truth of our origins that can't be overcome. Let's discuss why. Belief in God asserts that in reality there's an eternal being or force beyond time, space, and matter that's responsible for our existence. If this being or force had the ability to create us, reason dictates that it could make itself known to us if it wanted to. The fact that it doesn't do so indicates that God either doesn't exist or doesn't want us to be entirely certain that it exists. Under either conclusion, another explanation is necessary. If God doesn't exist, we in reality came into being some other way. If God does exist and doesn't want us to have certainty about it, we need viable options to choose from regarding our origins. Otherwise, believing we are creations of God would be our only option and would negate God's desire to keep things from being certain. Accordingly, even in a reality where there is a God, naturalistic explanations are required to maintain the uncertainty implicitly demanded by a God who could provide certainty but chooses not to. Disbelief in God asserts that in reality there isn't an intelligent, eternal being or force beyond time, space, and matter that's responsible for our existence. As we examine our origins from this perspective, we're forced to conclude that the universe either created itself or is itself eternal. For a self-created universe, the initiating cause must either exist outside of time, space, and matter, or there was an uncaused beginning of some kind. Unfortunately, anything existing outside of time, space, and matter is unobservable, and an uncaused beginning is more of a mystery than an explanation. While either could be correct, neither offer a satisfactory naturalistic explanation. If our universe is eternal, it is deemed to exist as a brute fact, i.e., its existence needs no explanation and requires nothing more fundamental as support. Once again, this may be the truth, but it ignores the explanatory requirement of a naturalistic explanation. Accordingly, even in a reality where there is no God, the only place we can turn for a true-to-form explanation of our existence is an eternal being or force beyond time, space, and matter. Interestingly, the theists who typically endorse faith provide an explanation, and the atheists who typically endorse explanations request faith. The end result of these competing logical premises is that theistic viewpoints open the door for non-theistic explanations, and non-theistic viewpoints open the door for theistic explanations. The two worldviews behave like two remaining kings at the end of a chess game. In this situation, the players can shuffle their pieces endlessly around the board without ever being able to reach checkmate. Any move that would put one piece close enough to remove the other simultaneously puts itself in a position to be removed. Returning to the question at hand of the rationality of belief in God, these factors suggest that classifying belief in God as rational or irrational is not the type of question that can be settled. Rather, it's a logical dilemma where the underlying premises create a never-ending stalemate. Given these considerations, belief in God finds itself right in the middle of being rational and irrational. Ditto for disbelief. It's a 50-50 split. There will be those who will want to bypass this conclusion and assert that evidence can indeed be gathered to gain an advantage one way or the other. Others will claim that there's available logic that reveals definitive truth if you just look at it from the proper angle. Some will draw inspiration from personal experiences that motivate them to pick a side. I understand the appeal of seeking certainty through any of those means, and it makes sense that the vast majority of humankind will take this approach. However, I personally believe that obtaining a definitive edge regarding the truth of our origins is an unconquerable quest. Any attempt towards acquiring incremental certainty merely distracts us from more important uses of our limited and precious time. The farther we dig on this topic, the farther we realize we need to go. The distance ends up being infinite. Those who agree that a natural, equal divide exists may still want to declare a belief or disbelief despite acknowledging the conditions that undermine our ability to find rational certainty. There are many benefits to making the choice to believe in one worldview or the other, and I would never discourage someone from doing so. Once again, we are free to believe in something even if doing so isn't necessarily objectively rational. While I admire and respect all individuals who choose to affirmatively believe or disbelieve in something that seems like a coin flip to me, I've found that I can't do the same. For me, it's most appropriate to admit that the counterbalances between these worldviews makes knowing the truth of our origins impossible. Given this conclusion, I've simply accepted that there's about a 50% chance there's a God, and about a 50% chance there isn't. That leaves me 100% uncertain and unconvinced as to which is true. Unfortunately, during my time studying this subject, I learned that our brains don't react well to this kind of conclusion. When it comes to questions about life and our ultimate destination after death, the human mind wants something to hang its hat on. Our brains are prediction machines, and to make accurate predictions, it needs reliable, certain information. Uncertainty is so undesirable that the brain experiences a type of pain when it's detected. This causes us to gravitate towards information that appears to be the most certain, and this extends to having certainty regarding our origins. With certainty in high demand, it's no surprise to see the number of religions, sects, and philosophies that exist to supply it on these matters. It's also unsurprising that so many people embrace one of these worldviews as the absolute truth in life. This settles the mind and allows it to use whatever foundation we choose to inform future behaviors, decisions, and predictions. Again, this is where the mind naturally wants to go, and trying to convince it to accept something else is an uphill battle. In my search for certainty, I've reached a paradoxical conclusion. Since the relationship between theistic and non-theistic worldviews makes absolute truth about our origins inherently uncertain, uncertainty serves as the best description of absolute truth. Those who follow this line of reasoning are typically known as agnostics. It's the belief that we cannot know whether there is or isn't a God, much less which religion, sect, or philosophy is the optimal one to embrace. It's remaining unconvinced that there is a God, and unconvinced that there isn't one. It's choosing to accept the world for what it ambiguously is, instead of what it unambiguously might be. That's where agnosticism stops, and that's also where I found myself about a year after the solar eclipse. For a time, I struggled with the realization that I had lived a life under a belief system that I no longer affirmatively believed to be true. All of my decisions and a great deal of my identity had been influenced by my religious foundation, and that foundation was gone. With that said, I also recognized that I had benefited in many meaningful ways from my formerly held beliefs. For decades, my mind was satisfied with a feeling of certainty about the purpose of life. I had built many friendships with others who shared the same beliefs, and those relationships were deepened by the common worldviews we shared. People respected my decisions to avoid risky behaviors because they appreciated the obligations I had to the God I worshipped. I had peace of mind. I had friends. I was safe. Plus, I had the wonderful hope of an eternity with God and my loved ones to look forward to if I made good decisions. Agnosticism felt so bland and cold in comparison, at least as I understood it. It provided no motivation to seek out other like-minded individuals and build relationships based on shared ideas. It was a soulless term I didn't want to be associated with, despite the logical conclusions I was drawing. I was saddened to look at the world in this way. Until, that is, I began to consider the implications of my conclusions.